Hello everyone, my name is Nick Spiller, and for my field trip location I chose the Florida Aquarium located in Tampa. I picked this location because I've heard a lot of good things about it and I've never been there, so I figured there's no time better than now and I went ahead and went there. Now when I first got to the Florida Aquarium you have to enter through a freshwater area, but then you get into the brackish water area that has a bunch of different fish and birds, and we had this cool spoonbill that was walking around, but then you get into the more saltwater area where they have this giant Goliath grouper and a lot of other giant fish, but I was there primarily looking for the smaller species that you can find inside the tanks that aren't even labeled, such as this here Halloween hermit crab. They get the name from having bright orange legs with red and gray bands that are going across them, as you can see. This crab is found on coral reefs and rubble areas all the way from Indo-Pacific area to the African coast across from southern Japan and south to Australia. It is an omnivore and it eats algae and meat that it finds on the reefs. The next small species that I found is called a bristleworm. There are over 8,000 species of bristleworms that are found across the world, and I found two that I was able to record in the anemone tank. Bristleworms are like the earthworm of the sea. They're made up of segments, and each segment has hair-like bristles, and they're made up of chitin. Bristleworms are mostly scavengers, so they feast on dead fish, as well as algae and dead leaves. What's crazy is bristleworms have been found from the coldest regions to the hottest thermal vents in the ocean. Now for my personal favorite. At first I thought this was a small worm that was all over the coral, but I actually got a hold of the head biologist that was at the Florida Aquarium, and I showed him this video and he told me that these are actually brittle stars. The reason that these are my favorite is because when I was doing some research on them, I found out that they're actually very important to corals. During the oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, it was found that they were actually cleaning off the corals that were covered in oil. And the reason that they do this is because the brittle stars, they use their arms, they extend them out to catch bits of drifting food that is floating by on the corals, and by doing this their arms brush off all the oil gunk that is stuck on them. And what's also interesting about the brittle stars is they have a skeleton which is made up of calcium carbonate, which is also one of the subjects that we learned about in class so far. The reason that this is significant is because when we learned about ocean acidification, we learned that this will cause them to actually start disintegrating over a long period of time. The primary producer I'm going to pick is going to be the red algae. The reason I play this clip is because these fish are local to us and they're the ones that are probably the most affected by the red algae, alongside manatees. This red algae is also known as red tide here in Florida. The reason it's so dangerous is because it produces potent neurotoxins. The reason that the past few years it's been so bad is because they were draining Lake Okeechobee, which was putting a lot of nutrients into the water, and these algae were just overgrowing because of this nutrient overload. Now red tide does occur naturally, however, when you add the added effect from the Lake Okeechobee draining, or this isn't only an issue here but also in Mississippi from the river there, the algae bloom just grows out of control and it's a lot worse of a problem than it should be. At the end of the day, I'd like to say that the one key thing that I learned here was that you got to pay attention to the little things. All these little microspecies, they're really undercredited, and I feel like they play a huge role in our environment and the marine ecosystem, and that it's very important that we do our research on them as well, and you do find cool things out about them. Thank you for watching my presentation, and it was a great field trip.